Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Domestic Prisoners of War webinar. And today we are going to examine a little bit about what DPoW does within WILPF, and we have some amazing speakers who are here to share with you their firsthand experiences working with the domestic in a domestic violence and a domestic abuse arena. Okay, so we're going to open with an opening to introduce myself. My name is Dee Murphy. I am the co-chair and founder of DPoW, and I have with me Rita Gonzalez, who is the co-chair of DPoW as well. So what we're going to do is open with what is DPoW? What does it mean? What does domestic prisoners of war mean? A lot of us, those of us who have are survivors of childhood and adult domestic violence and abuse, generally we have comparisons. Some of us have residual effects and impacts. We compare being a person that's subjected to someone who's propagating a war, perpetuating a war against you in your own home, with a person who is held captive. Basically, they decide what you eat, who you communicate, how you feel from day to day, your safety and security. Everything kind of revolves around this person that's waging war against you in your own household. So that's where we came up with the term. It was formed by other survivors comparing notes on our survival stories and the things that are out there, that the system that's in place that is mostly biased against the victim. There's a lot of changes that are happening with legislation, and some of our members will fill in on that, but there's also a lot of gaps that are left over that don't manage the long-term residual impacts. So we are looking at the impacts, we're examining and exploring and highlighting that. We've been around about a year, we're working with allies and other survivor-led sister organizations towards recommendations and legislative improvements. At primary, we're focusing on the United States. We feel that we should do our own homework before attempting to look across the seas and tell other people what they need to do. There's a lot of work that needs to be done here in the US. Next slide, please, George. And Rita will open with her statement, our co-chair. Mute, you're mute.
Sorry about that. I don't know why it took so long to find the mute button. I'm actually reading it out because if I do it ad lib, I'll go off track and we'll be here for 5 minutes, me talking about the one thing. I just want everyone that's present here to be advised and assured that the following webinar will contain some sensitive content related to domestic violence and may be distressing or triggering to individuals who have experienced or are currently experiencing domestic violence. This topic can evoke strong emotions, and painful memories may resurface. If you feel any anxiety, it's okay to step away. Take a deep breath and return to the session. Your being here is important to us, and we hope the information presented will be of value to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. And as an opening as co-chair, I would like to express, yes, there is something blocking at the top of the slide. I'm not certain what that is, but I would like to express solidarity with those affected by oppression and violence on both sides in the Middle East. I know that we've received several messages from people that are heavily engaged in the peace movement, and they're just, they're very supportive of what DPoW is doing, but they feel like that's where 100% of their attention needs to be. I'd like to emphasize that the root causes of a lot of this that we're facing worldwide is oppression and dominance. Dominance and oppression, those are the same links that go throughout all of this. Whether it's one individual trying to dominate or oppress another, or it's one group trying to oppress or dominate another, In Buddhism, we say that there are three poisons that affect humanity, and that is greed, anger, and foolishness. So these three factor into another level beyond the domination and oppression. But because there's a war raging and there's wars and oppression raging throughout the world, does not mean that it doesn't still exist in our homes, and it's not an issue that should be managed. Thank you, George. Next slide, please. So what is domestic abuse? Domestic abuse, also called domestic violence or intimate partner violence, can be defined as a pattern of behavior in any relationship that is used to gain or maintain power and control over an intimate partner. Abuse is physical, sexual, emotional, economic, or psychological actions or threats of actions that influence another person. This includes any behaviors that frighten, intimidate, terrorize, manipulate, hurt, humiliate, blame, injure, or wound someone. Domestic abuse can happen to anyone of any race, age, sexual orientation, religion, or gender. It can occur within a range of relationships, including couples who are married, living together, or dating. And domestic violence affects people of all socioeconomic backgrounds and education levels. And that's from the UN.org. What is domestic abuse? Next slide, please. And Rita will, actually, if you'd like to stop sharing for a moment, George, what I can do is go ahead and share from my end, because I think that's coming up when someone commented about the screen. I think that's coming up because she's got us pinned. George has us pinned, our tech person here. So if I share, maybe it won't be there. Okay, Rita, thank you.
Okay, hold on a second. And I wrote this, I'm reading it out loud, what I've written, because I don't want to get off track. Why should we care? We should care because it's about human rights and dignity. Domestic violence is a violation of human rights and undermines the basic principles of human dignity. Everyone has the right to live free from violence and abuse, regardless of their gender, age, race, or any other characteristic. Two, it has a public health impact. Domestic violence has severe physical, psychological, and emotional consequences for the individuals involved. It can lead to injuries, chronic health problems, mental health disorders such as depression and anxiety, and even suicide. By addressing domestic violence, we can promote the well being and health of individuals and communities. Gender equality. Domestic violence is often rooted in gender inequality and discrimination. It disproportionately affects women and girls, although men can also be victims. By addressing domestic violence, we work towards achieving gender equality and challenging harmful gender stereotypes and power imbalances. Child welfare. Children who witness domestic violence are at a risk of long term physical, psychological, and emotional harm. Growing up in an environment of violence can have a significant impact on their development, well being, and future relationships. By addressing domestic violence, we protect the rights and well being of children. Oh, sorry. Hold on. Oh, I'm sorry. A little triggering there to myself. Um, Economic impact. Oh, my goodness. I'm so sorry. Hold on. I'm feeling some emotion right now. Domestic violence has economic costs that affect individuals, families, and societies as a whole. It leads to lost productivity, increased healthcare expenses, legal costs, and the need for social support services. By addressing domestic violence, we can reduce these economic burdens and promote social and economic development. Prevention and intervention. Domestic violence is a cycle that often repeats across generations. By addressing it, we can break this cycle and create healthier, safer environments for individuals and families. Prevention programs and early interventions can help identify and support those at risk, promoting healthier relationships and reducing violence in future generations. Legal and social justice. Domestic violence is a crime that should not be tolerated. By holding perpetrators accountable and providing support to survivors, we uphold the principles of justice and ensure that victims have access to legal protections and support services. Social responsibility. Addressing domestic violence is a collective responsibility. Society as a whole has a role to play in creating a culture that rejects violence and supports survivors. By caring about domestic violence, we demonstrate our commitment to building safer, more compassionate communities for everyone. It is essential that society recognizes domestic violence as a serious issue that works together to prevent and support survivors and hold perpetrators accountable. I just had to repeat that. Um, it's not an issue of, well, it's not happening to me, but it's happening to somebody you know and may have happened to you already. That's why we should care. Thank you, Dee.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you very much. I will go ahead and share the screen again. So just information. Here's a little basic information about our committee. If you decide to join, each member chooses an area of focus to research and work on. Currently, we are divided into 8 subject areas. Some are examining the economic impacts of domestic violence. Others are examining the mental health of abusers, child abuse, childhood abuse, domestic violence in the GLBTQIA+ community, domestic violence among African Americans, new arrivals and immigrant domestic abuse, elder and disabled domestic abuse, and domestic abuse among members of the police and military communities. If you have experience or expertise in any of these areas, please join us and let us know which area you'd like to work in. We continue up with those who are already working on them, or if you'd like to research and examine another topic area. DPoW is actively forming partnerships with other survivors and survivor-focused organizations. We are pleased to have guest speakers tonight who are supporting our work and would like to speak with everyone based on our work and experiences. Our first guest is Michelle French, a domestic abuse survivor and activist. For those of you who may not be aware of who Michelle is, here's a trailer of the docuseries Children of the Underground.
I caught my ex-husband in the act of molesting my daughter. The judge didn't believe it, and she was court-ordered to live with this child molester.
He ended up being the first pedophile on the 10 most wanted list.
The problem was much bigger than I thought.
Pretty soon, I was aware of hundreds of these cases.
If there's no other option, get in touch with Faye Yeager. She's the one that can help.
I was ready to fight a war.
Here's how to disappear into Faye's underground.
Call again. The police has got this phone tapped.
Don't look at people. Don't talk out loud. Don't tell anyone where we're going.
I tell them how to break the law and get away with it.
Faye had contacts worldwide.
The FBI considered me dangerous.
She had a lot of enemies.
You had bounty hunters, law enforcement.
Death threats on a daily basis.
She's not telling the whole story.
The truth is more complicated.
The more I found out, I got very concerned.
It's not right what you're doing.
Why would somebody make this up?
Why is Faye on trial and none of these rapists?
Of course you don't want that to have happened to your daughter.
I do believe their stories.
When your firstborn's taken out of your arms and handed to someone that you know is dangerous. I'd choose being a fugitive any day.
So everyone, I'm really honored and grateful to welcome Michelle French, and she's going to give us some of her insights. She is the daughter of Faye Yeager, as you saw in the video.
Hi, everyone. How are you doing today? I want to thank you for your time and energy and being here with us and joining everybody to share their stories and their impact that these events have had on their lives. And thank you, Dee, for, just giving us a platform to show people that it's okay to live another day. It's okay to survive. And I had this whole page wrote up and different points and things like that. And as I was listening to the entries, I felt like it just doesn't need to be scripted. And it needs to really come from a part of us that is lost. And I feel like when we're in a situation like this and we're recovering, as we're being abused, these people take and they go and they target us for a reason, because they're trying to steal something within us. And each one of us have this level of strength and this level of resilience that is really compelling. So I'll just start with that. And Dee, if you have any questions or anything like that, I would love to answer them. And whatever you'd like to hear from me.
Thank you, Michelle. At this point, we are just going to go ahead with the presentations. And that was the kind of the format that we had, you and then Professor Jane, and then Rebecca. And then at that point, we would go into our breakout rooms and come back for final Q&As. So did you want to change it? I see you're on the road. Did you want questions and answers now, or?
Yes, I can do question and answers now. I mean, that's fine. I will add that, as we're going through, and I will touch on a few points, and if you want to send out that document later and make it available that I sent you, there's 3 steps as we go through these processes. And I think that's really important for a lot of people to know that may not have come to the realization that they're in this process. And, the number one is realizing what is happening to me is wrong. It's wrong. It's clearly wrong. But a lot of times, if you've been raised in that scenario, and then now you're in a relationship in that scenario, and or you are a child that is being abused and you're going, something isn't right, but it feels wrong. That's the first level of acknowledgement. The next one is this shame. The shame overpowers us and we feel, it's our fault. We couldn't, how could we have stopped this? How come, it's happening, blah, 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 all these different things. The next one for me was anger. And I'm talking anger. And I was 11 or 12 years old, and I got my father's gun and I pointed it at, and I told him if he was to ever touch me again, that would be the end of it. And I told him, I said, I wouldn't really kill you. I'm just going to make you suffer. And I did. I kept my promise from that point on. I layered my room with knives when I slept, and booby traps when he would try to sneak in while I was sleeping, and my windows and everything else. So you can go on the offense, and and once you gain that power back and they know you mean business, and you look them in the eye and say, you have to sleep sometime, they know. Now they live in fear. So then the next one is, you start to heal, and you start to learn what peace is, and learn what trust is again, and learn what love is again. And, I learned all of that. God kind of stepped me through the whole process. And the key is not to stay in any one of those, processes for any amount of time. You have to keep moving. You cannot be stagnant. And if you are stagnant, you're done. It's how I feel. That was my experience and things like that. But yes, so I just wanted to touch on those. And I felt those were really important for people to know that, shame is okay to feel shame. You're going to. Anger is okay. It's okay to be angry. We should be angry. We should be angry. They stole from us. It's okay. And then you start moving into recovery. So I hope that helps.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. I see a lot of heads nodding from people that may have experienced this, that can definitely relate. And your positive message is one that is very encouraging, to watch how healthy you are today with everything that you've come through with your family. Is definitely encouraging and a model for the rest of us.
Well, I feel like, I went through drug abuse. I went through, I was an alcoholic. I was on crack. And I feel like I'm an open book and nothing is kind of off limits. But once I started to realize, and, I had a few abortions. I'm a staunch believer in God, but in the beginning, I knew if I had children, in my core, I was so fearful of continuing the cycle that for me, it wasn't even an option. First child I gave it for adoption. Next two, I had an abortion. I was like, I was terrified. And it's okay. It's okay, to have these moments, we haven't been given a good model of stability. We weren't taught, stability. So we have to learn that on our own, essentially, and, start pulling in people that are truly friends and truly mean. And that doesn't mean your family. Trust me, my family is next level of whack, but it's the people in your support circle. They're the ones that can pull you through. And, it goes without saying that I feel like God made my husband for me, and I was able to finally feel safe. And to truly feel safe, you can put no price tag on. And I think we all can relate to that, is that finally that feeling of safety. And my boys, all the way through, I told them they can ask me anything at any point, and I would never lie to them. And I haven't. I always am honest with them. Didn't matter how tough or how hard that question is. I feel like your children deserve the truth, because then they know that you're always there for them. Always have their back.
Thank you so very much, Michelle. And some never even find peace, some stay stuck there. They don't find their way out. We will discuss later the rates of women that are incarcerated as a direct result of these early childhood experiences that sometimes go over into adult behaviors. And I believe this is actually a very good time to introduce the work of Professor Jane Ann Murray, who is on the board of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. And she has done work on behalf of women who have been subjected to abuse or in abusive relationships. There's an article out there, it's on one of her description pages, where she helped a young woman who was forced by her abuser in court to drown her own baby. So there are some people that just do not make it out. But I will introduce Professor Jane Ann. She has that presentation that she had so carefully prepared for us. And thank you.
Thank you, Dee.
We'll have Q&A after the breakouts. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Dee. Can you hear me? I connected on my phone because I'm in a kind of a busy place, but I'm in a quiet spot. Oh.
Okay. We can hear you.
Okay, good. Because I connected on two different mechanism. So I thought this might work a bit better. Hopefully it's not too loud. Sorry about that. Okay, so I am going to share my screen, and thank you everybody for having me here today. Share. And I just want to play my slideshow. I can start. There we go. So hopefully everybody can see this. Can they? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can see.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. I really appreciate the offer to speak here today, and I'm going to talk about the issue of criminalized domestic abuse survivors. Obviously, we are all aware of just how pervasive domestic violence is in our society, and sexual assault as well. And with the Me Too era, it just became even more salient to us, the extent to which women in particular are subject to this in their lives. But what is also kind of becoming a dawning awareness across the country is that the line between victim and perpetrator is very blurred. One day the person could be, the perpetrators could be a victim one day, victim can be a perpetrator one day. And it's that kind of blurred line that is the focus of the work that I've been doing with my clemency clinic at the University of Minnesota Law School. And it's a particularly tragic part of the work I do, because I do represent a lot of women serving long sentences, and it has just been so extraordinary to me to realize just how much childhood trauma, sexual abuse, intimate partner violence played a role in their pathways into crime. And I'll illustrate with a couple of examples. Let me just get my screen forwarding here. Dee had mentioned my client Samantha Hygis. Here she is pictured with her dogs at Shakopee. She, in 2005, at the age of 19, she gave birth to her first child in the bathtub in the apartment that she shared with her boyfriend. She was entirely alone, but for the boyfriend in the other room. And at his direction and his insistence, because he did not want to be a father at that point, he was 19 too, and because of his threat to do something more egregious to the baby, she drowned her baby in the bathtub. I know this is a really sad and tragic case. One can't help but, feel a horrible sense of empathy and sadness for that baby. But also, I think for Samantha, she had hid her pregnancy from her family and her friends and had no prenatal care at all. Nobody knew about this. She was tried through various circumstances. The police learned about this, and she was tried for murder in 2009. There was extensive evidence at trial of her boyfriend's abuse, confirmed by several witnesses, but perhaps most importantly by the investigating detective, who testified at trial that he had never wavered in his belief that she was the victim of domestic violence. She was convicted of the murder by the jury and sentenced to 25 years. It was not a mandatory minimum sentence, but the guidelines are presumptive, and the guidelines were 25 years. She was a model prisoner. She was granted clemency through the work of my clinic in 2021. She had served almost 13 years. Another example is also from an actual case of mine. And this is a very common pathway into crime of survivors of domestic abuse. My client, Jane Doe, and I have to say, even though this isn't a very specific case I'm telling you about, I could have picked one of 20 other cases that I have, and essentially fill this slide out very similarly. What's also kind of shocking is just the length of sentences these women get. At age 35, she was convicted of meth distribution, low-level, nonviolent, unarmed role. her criminal involvement was primarily to support her own addiction. I mean, obviously, she's also getting some money to sort of survive and put a roof over her head because her addiction made her hard to work. She had experienced severe neglect as a child and abandonment by her father. And it led to an early experimentation with drugs and ultimately an addiction to drugs. And she found herself in a wave of relationships with abusive and controlling men, culminating in a marital relationship that put her at severe risk of becoming a homicide victim. And there is a lethality scale that various law enforcement agencies use to determine just how much at risk an individual in a relationship might be to homicide by their partner. Anything over a score of 9 means you are at considerable risk of being a homicide victim. When we scored Jane Doe on this risk, her score was 22. She was at severe risk. He tried to strangle her and almost killed her. And yet the judge was totally unmoved by anything about her. I don't know how much of the domestic violence actually came in front of him. I'm not sure it would have made much of a difference to this particular judge, who's one of the worst in the country, but he sentenced her to 23 years. She has served about 8 years. We have filed for clemency for her, and we will try to seek reduction in sentence in 2 years. When she served 10 years, we can go back to the court. Okay, there's something in the chat, and I want to make sure that I'm not missing anything in case people are having a hard time hearing me. Can you share the scale with you? Oh yeah, actually I can let Dee know about that scale, but we actually had to sign up and pay. I think we paid $100 or something to get access to it and do the training on it. But I'm happy to send that information to Dee that she can share with all of you. So, before I finish my examples, I mean, I don't have an example of somebody who killed their abuser that I represented. So I just decided to just stick with cases I knew very intimately. But of course, another clear example of criminalized domestic abuse survivors in custody is the individual who killed their abuser, and sadly a very huge portion of our homicide population in women's prisons, and I'll get to that in a moment. But before I kind of talk about the statistics of women with victimization in prison, I just want to give you a couple of charts on the number of women in prison, and I think that that's also very significant because we know women have generally in the population, huge proportions of them have experienced sexual and domestic violence. So looking at the kind of the whole pie of our female incarcerated population is, I think, an important part of this analysis. So currently, according to the Prison Policy Initiative, we have about 173,000 women incarcerated in facilities across the country. Interestingly, the majority of them, just a little, over half, the bigger portion of them are in jails. So this is people waiting who've just been arrested, or they're maybe serving a short sentence. 11 million people churn through our prisons every year. And so the local jails see a lot of people for little short sentences and maybe see them multiple times. And we'll get to the victimization of women in that context. At the state prisons, we have 72,000. Federal prisons have 14,000. And what I think is also of interest, and I just have to make this shorter. Okay. What's also, of course, of interest is the massive growth in women's incarceration since the 1980s, and that it's significantly higher than the growth in male incarceration. Women's incarceration has grown at twice the pace of men's incarceration in recent decades. I believe in Minnesota, it's much higher. I think I was looking at a statistic earlier about it's been growing 9-fold in Minnesota. Women disproportionately located in local jails. So it kind of reflects, I think, a lot of the, a lot of homelessness and those with mental disabilities end up in our jails. Black and American Indian, Alaska Native women are markedly overrepresented in prisons and jails. Lesbian and bisexual women and girls are disproportionately subject to incarceration. 1/3 of the women in prison are either lesbian or bisexual versus 1/10 of the men. And incarcerated women report high rates of childhood disadvantages, abuse, and homelessness. And let's just drill a little deeper into that. The data is sparse on actual statistics of the history of victimization. We have some surveys and we have a sort of a general sense. I would just say anecdotally, in my experience, every single one of the women I've represented have a history of trauma and violence and physical violence, domestic violence, and sexual assault. One study found that up to 94% of the women in jails experienced physical or sexual violence prior to incarceration. We're not talking about like immediately prior, we're just talking at some point in their lives. Nearly 60% of female state prisoners nationwide have a history of physical or sexual abuse. That's kind of the general thinking about it, possibly much higher than that. One survey, which is very interesting, from a journalist in the New Republic, actually, and she sent out questionnaires to prisons all over the country. It's a super interesting article. She found that at least 30% of those serving time on murder or manslaughter charges were protecting themselves or a loved one from physical or sexual violence when they killed or when they committed the conduct that led to their conviction. There is a very interesting study of incarcerated Native American women in Minnesota done by Violence Free Minnesota. You can download their report. They did it just before COVID hit, so it could have been a deeper study if only all the visits hadn't been terminated in March 2020. But of the individuals that they were able to interview up to that point, they found that 84% of the people that they interviewed had experienced intimate partner violence. This is of the Native American women in Minnesota. And, you know, it's a huge Minnesota issue and a kind of an anomaly in the country, and something that I'm really interested in exploring further. And it's just a deeply, would you like to, okay, I hope you're all hearing me. Yeah. Is that 23% today of our female incarcerated population in Shakopee, which is the only female state facility in state prison facility in the state, is Native American. Flip side of that, with all our men in custody, only 9% of the male population is Native American. And of course, our Native American population is something like 1%. So this is an extraordinarily disproportionate incarceration of Native Americans in general, but a huge gender disparity. And then the Violence Free Minnesota their survey shows you 84% of those individuals, the females, have experienced intimate partner violence, 48% child abuse, 47% child sexual abuse, 29% adult sexual assault. Very, very troubling statistics here. So what can we do about this? Well, I mean, there's lots of things we could do, and we can talk about this in the Q&A, including sort of trauma-centered psychological support for females in particular in custody. But any individuals who've experienced this kind of trauma in their background need that kind of help when they get to prison. But I'm, a defense lawyer, and I'm really interested in something more systemic that can actually shorten these sentences and then bring these women out where they can get the kind of treatment in a more therapeutic environment. In New York, in 2019, it passed the groundbreaking Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act of 2019. It's all set forth in a very interesting report published earlier this year by the Sentencing Project. You can download it on the web, and it's another link that I'll give to Dee. But in this, it grants prospective and retroactive relief to people convicted of certain crimes, not, I believe, first-degree murder, but I believe manslaughter is included. But as long as they can show that at the time of the offense, they had experienced substantial physical, sexual, or psychological abuse. This abuse was a significant factor to their commission of the offense, and the sentence imposed, or which would have been imposed, was unduly harsh. What's interesting about this is not only does it grant this relief going forward, so it's encouraging judges to be more lenient where this factor exists as a component in the actual commission of the sentence, but it's also giving them a second look. So individuals already incarcerated who could have benefited from this law get to go back to court and ask for a second look at their sentence and say, hey, you weren't really thinking about domestic violence when you sentenced me, but now our thinking and the social science has changed. So could you reconsider my sentence in light of that? The court isn't obligated to grant the relief. I mean, they have to obviously consider the motion. They don't have to grant the relief. There's all sorts of weighing and balancing that goes in. And 40 people have been granted relief so far under that act. There are initiatives in Illinois, similar initiatives in Illinois, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Minnesota. In fact, my clinic, working with Violence Free Minnesota, introduced a bill in the legislature last year, which did not make it through judiciary, but you know, it's the beginning. These things take a long time. Lobbying and legislation takes a long time, but we're going to try again with the new legislature. And I would add that you know, I think that the time is very ripe for this, and so it's kind of exciting that we've got a unified legislature that hopefully will be open to these issues. I wanted to continue with a couple of additional things. So, you know, I kind of think, oh my goodness, I know my talk's probably deeply triggering to people, but I just want to bring to your attention the whole issue of sexual abuse of women, of female prisoners in their prison, you know, in prison. The Senate Permanent Investigations Committee did a report in December 2022 focusing on federal facilities, and it was just extraordinarily rampant. They found widespread sexual abuse of female prisoners across US prisons. Women were abused by prison staff in at least 19 of the 29 federal facilities that held female inmates since 2012. The Bureau of Prisons has opened 5,415 cases alleging sexual abuse by federal employees from 2012 to 2022. There were at least 134 instances across 19 female facilities where BOP employees were either prosecuted for sexual abuse of female prisoners or where the BOP Office of Internal Affairs had substantiated allegations that BOP employees sexually abused female prisoners. They found that the prison officers had ignored complaints under the Prison Rape Elimination Act, that there were flawed PREA audits, failure to hold the perpetrators accountable, a huge backlog in investigations of complaints against employees. In fact, in Dublin, California, where I have a client who was abused by an officer, the warden, the chaplain, and the person charged with reporting Prison Rape Elimination Act complaints have all been prosecuted and convicted of sexual abuse of inmates, which is just truly shocking. So I will stop my share. And yeah, I wanted to talk about that because what we're seeing with the individuals who were sexually abused in prison is that that they also have a history of domestic violence or sexual abuse. And so it's almost like the prison guards were reading their pre-sentence reports and kind of targeting them based on the history that the prison officers were able to learn. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to stick around for Q&A. I know we have another presentation to come, and thank you for your attention and your interest to this very difficult topic, but in a moment where I think we can really try to make a difference.
Thank you very much for the informative report. Jean Ann. Yes, it is very triggery material. And I'm so grateful for your in-depth coverage of this because I know that during my part of the presentation, my focus is on the economic impact that abuse related matters and women's incarceration. These are people who are missing from our society that could otherwise be our doctors or attorneys or, you know, politicians and contributing our artists in so many different ways. And they're instead managing a trauma and going through cycles of incarceration and mental health challenges. So that's one area that I plan to work with and WILPF with other committees that have focuses on human rights and the economy. So thank you very much for pointing these out. And so at the next speaker, we will move forward. Our next guest, and by the way, I just wanted to mention some other things about Professor Murray. She is a recipient of the National Association of Criminal Defense Attorneys Champion of Legal Justice Award. And as you can see from her work, it is well deserved. So thank you. Our next guest is Rebecca, the Operations Director of the St. Paul Ramsey and Ramsey County Intervention Project, which is an advocacy program here in St. Paul, Minnesota. This organization is very close to my heart. As a former client of this organization, I would not be here to speak with everyone, nor have had the strength to found DPoW without their assistance. During the time that they helped me in 2005, I had no money. I was going through an extremely traumatic situation as a survivor myself, trying to manage a court system with that was stacked against me to protect my own child from someone who had harmed her. And I just want to remind everyone that we will be having questions and answers for everyone in a little bit, but we still have a little bit of presentation, and then we'll open the floor to questions. Rebecca, are you prepared to speak? Are you able to come off of mute?
Yes, I think, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, great. That's great. Am I able to share the screen?
Sure, I can make you a co-host and we'll do that. Let's see.
Let's see. Oh, I was trying to get the full screen. Let's see. Can
try view slideshow.
All right.
And we're going to pin you so that we can see the screen and you at the same time. I know it kind of confused Jean Ann when I did that. I didn't tell her in advance that she's side by side with her screen. So you'll have that advantage.
Oh, sorry, I haven't done this for a little bit. I'm on view.
Slideshow is up at the top near where it says SPIP. There you go.
Got it. Okay. All right. I just have a few slides, but sorry about that. So yeah, so my name's Rebecca and I work at, well, we call it SPIP or St. Paul Intervention because our name is so long. And I've been doing this work for a long time, over 35 years. I've done various things, worked at a shelter, worked doing court advocacy, hospital advocacy, training. And I'm currently the operations director here at SPIP. And I'm going to start just a little bit telling you about our agency. And I don't know how many people are on here from Minnesota or from around the country, but we've been around since 1984. We're a nonprofit agency. We don't charge anything for any of our services, and we provide completely confidential advocacy services and attorney services. We were founded to basically, our goal is to eliminate domestic violence and the systems and that allow the oppression of women. We started out just serving women. We've since expanded. We serve men as well, although the vast majority of domestic violence victims are women, and those are the vast majority of the people we serve. Our goal is to give people information and support so they can make their own decisions. And originally the first intervention project in the country, I don't know if people are familiar with the Duluth project, but that was where the first intervention project was. And we were sort of roughly based on that. And the idea behind the intervention project was that so that victims could stay in their homes instead of having to flee. Because traditionally it was always up to a victim of an assault, domestic assault, to leave the home and uproot herself and her children and to leave. And so the idea with the intervention project is that the abuser would be removed from the home so the victim could stay in the home with the children, if they have children, and be safe and get protections from the courts. So that's kind of the original foundation. So we work a lot in the criminal justice system. Goal is to hold perpetrators accountable and keep victims safe. And we do also help with filing protection orders. We attend court hearings, and we do a lot of other services, support services. We have support groups. We have a lot of transitional services helping people with safety planning and housing issues. And there's just, as you're all aware, a multitude of issues that can arise when you've been a victim of, especially long-term, of domestic violence. And we help with a lot of financial and safety things. We help victims get their locks changed. We help them, we sometimes give them cameras or window alarms or a new phone if their abuser busted their phone, which is pretty common. Maybe help them get their tires fixed if their tires are slashed, or various other things, and help them. We're not a shelter, but we work very closely with the shelters. So we'll help find shelter, just, helping navigate all the multiple systems and being a support person, people. And we will serve people as long as they need our services. That we don't have a timeline. It's based on the person's needs. So sometimes we'll work with somebody for a week. Sometimes it will be 10 years. It really depends. And when people share children with their abuser, there's often ongoing court issues or custody visitation, stalking, lots of different things. So we're let people know we're here for them as long as they need us. And we have a diverse staff. We have ages, probably, I think the youngest is maybe 22 and the oldest is 71. So, and we have people who speak, advocates who speak Somali, Spanish, Hmong, and Croatian. And for other languages, we use interpreters. And we have some specific services for older victims. We have a support group specifically for older domestic abuse victims because the needs are often different than the younger women. And we have a Spanish speaking group. We hope to have a Somali and Hmong speaking group in the future as well. And we also are part of a victim service center downtown St. Paul, where people can go to get services there. And we work with our sister agencies and some of the government partners there. Another thing I think Dee had wanted me to talk about too is some of what we've seen as changes. And so I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Blueprint for Safety, but it's an initiative that started, I think it was in 2010, I believe, that here in St. Paul, that it's essentially a best practices for the criminal justice system when it comes to domestic violence. And we, along with Praxis International, another nonprofit, and the city of St. Paul and Ramsey County government agencies work to create the Blueprint for Safety, which is a kind of a living document. And it's looking at each arm of the criminal justice system and the impact on domestic violence in terms of how can the system be made better, and not focused on individual players in the system, but on the practices and the culture and the policies, all that. So, and that's something that we're still working with, and it's kind of expanded to a lot of communities across Minnesota and the country. But looking at, you know, how each of the systems interact with each other, because they used to be very siloed, the police and the prosecution and probation and the courts. And certainly, you know, there's lots of work to be done in improving the response, but I think we've done a lot to make things better and getting people to talk to each other and working together. We also have a homicide prevention team, which is looking at some of the lethality factors and risk factors with particular cases that are pretty egregious and there's, you know, high degrees of danger. We do a lot of training as well with the medical systems and the police and different people to kind of keep people aware and make them know about understand domestic violence and what the resources are. And I think it's really important to keep doing that, because I feel like, particularly like the medical system, a number of years ago, they did all this training and a lot of work, and then they sort of dropped it off and they said, oh, now we're concerned with nutrition. And it's really important to keep that, because so many, you know, keep that in the doctors and nurses and social workers in their, you know, mindset, because there's a lot of victims that will go to the hospital or go to their doctor that won't seek other types of help, but they will go there. And it's a real opportunity to provide help and connection to get domestic abuse victims, you know, the help that they need. The other part of our program I forgot to mention too is we have 3 attorneys, 1 full-time and 2 part-time, that primarily do representation with orders for protection, but they also provide legal advice on other issues on custody, divorce, housing, eviction, you know, other things that come up. And our services are, again, totally free. That's been a huge help. We also have legal clinics for victims, because that's such a huge barrier, is trying to, I'm sure you'll talk about that, Dee, when you talk about the economic impact, but of getting affordable legal help, how hard that is. Trying to do a time check here. But essentially we are, you know, our kind of part of our mission too is to be here for all victims of domestic abuse in St. Paul and St. Paul area, no matter what the, you know, their background, no matter what. We've worked with people who, you know, who are in the kind of upper echelons, to people who are on the street and homeless, or just all different backgrounds, and everybody deserves the help and confidential services, and we're here for them. Many of our staff are survivors and have been through many experiences. It's really tough work, but we have an amazing group of women who work here who just are so dedicated, and we're constantly learning, because things are constantly changing. The laws change, policies within different governmental agencies change, the financial resources change, the funding changes. So it's a constant kind of dance to do what we need to do to provide the best services. We also do some focus groups, and we have in some of our training with the St. Paul Police, we have focus groups so that the new recruits can hear directly from victims, survivors, what they've been through, and that's very powerful. I think I'll maybe end there, and then for the Q&A, I'm guessing people might have some questions, and there's probably things I left out, but for now, thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Rebecca, for your work. Rebecca was there when I was there back in 2005, so We look at where people are coming from and their dedication to this purpose and the work that they do. And thank you is not enough, really, to describe what you do for the community.
Thank you, Dee.
You're welcome.
And can I just add really quick, I'm sorry, I forgot that we work really closely with the other domestic violence programs in the Twin Cities, particularly in St. Paul. And we really rely on each other because we all provide different types of services. And it's really important to connect with other programs because we can all help each other and learn from each other.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So I want to say thank you once again to Michelle, Professor Jane Ann, and Rebecca. We will open up the floor for questions later in the program. For now, DPoW will present brief summaries and updates to our work from our presentation given last October 2022. Jasmine has recently joined our team. She's been doing a lot of the research for us. She is a student working on her second degree, her first degree being in public health, and I believe it's now nursing is the second degree that Jasmine is working on. She's, like I said, done a lot of research for us, and Jasmine, you are up now. I'm going to go ahead and share screens here. 1 second as a guideline for you. Are you ready? Do you have?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Oh,
But whenever it's up, I'll go ahead and go.
okay. And do you have your screen up? Because if I share screen, I can't see you.
Oh,
So,
I don't have my screen up, but I could do it real quick.
okay.
Okay. So my screen is up now. Thank you so much.
Let me go
for
ahead and allow you to share. 1 second, Jasmine. Okay, you should be able to share with us now.
Okay, let me see. Do share screen. Is okay, slideshow.
And I'm
Nope.
going to spotlight you as well.
Okay. So, hello everyone. Thank you so much for coming to the webinar. I'm very excited to share some of my research. I chose to do some research in the state of Florida, just because there are vastly diverse services per each state. And so each state is different per each political situation, geo-economical situation, and just a lot of other things that make each state different as far as getting domestic abuse services. So I first just want to go over some of the legal procedures impact, specifically in Florida and maybe even nationally as well. But we did see a huge impact as far as the pandemic and COVID-19 on getting resources for domestic abuse services. So during the pandemic, you could file for injunction, as some of you may know, is also called a restraining order. You could file through injunction through a virtual method without having to go in person to one of these legal aid services. And you could also do it without a notary, which is very important for a lot of people. And that influenced a lot of people's access to services. And from the people I talked to, as far as attorneys and legal aids that were going through the process and still providing service through the pandemic, they noticed that although the frequency in which domestic abuse was still consistent, they still had the same amount of numbers of injunctions that they were seeing and filing in that area. They saw that the severity was quite worse. And so the information provided in the injunction, it seemed like people were filing them when it came to life and death. A lot of the most severe situations came out of the pandemic. And so that was really impactful for them as well. And from the pandemic and onward, we actually saw the creation of Turbo Court. So Turbo Court is that virtual method of filing injunction without having to come in person. You do have to show proof of burdensome of why you cannot file. You need to file remotely and not in person. And so, of course, depending on the exception of why you need to file remotely or not, this could still be quite of a large benefit for a lot of people who, again, work, school, life, other family issues, economic issues really need to file remotely because getting to a in-person legal aid service is just not accessible for them. Another thing that we saw in Florida is that in 2019, Florida came the 42nd state to add services of unemployment service and access and benefits for those in need through domestic violence. So basically, if you're going through domestic violence and you had to leave work because of the situation, whether you felt unsafe or threatened at home, you could not make it to work due to transit, that would make you unsafe as well. The House Bill 563 passed it so that you can receive a temporary compensation and service through unemployment. Of course, it does have to be a situation in which you are presenting evidence that you cannot make it to work and there was no other way through your employer in which you could work something out and still maintain some employment through them. So that does put a lot of burden on people that maybe did not have that much of a close relationship with their employer as far as getting those benefits, but it's still something accessible for them now as of 2019, which is very important. And I also just want to point out that there is a really big difference between the civil aspect of injunction versus the criminal aspect of domestic abuse. So there is something in Florida we call VOCA, the Victim of Crime Act Compensation Program. So you are given a lump sum of money per the situation that you were in, depending on what the violent act was or the criminal act was. So whether it was identity theft, domestic violence, sexual abuse, whatever case may be, you can receive a lump sum of money because you were a victim of that issue or that crime, but it has to be a criminal service. So an injunction or a restraining order does not count as a criminal service. So you have to go through the court system in which you are through a hearing and that person is convicted of domestic violence in order for you to get that compensation. So for someone who does not want to go through that process or because of extraneous situations cannot go through that process because of their fear of their life, their fear of the aftermath, that leaves a lot of victims without that very necessary aid because again, their situation of getting injunction does not necessarily count as a criminal service or criminal act as far as getting through the legal process. So that's a big difference that a lot of people see in Florida and maybe in other states that have the victim compensation program that it's they're not getting as many services, unfortunately. Another thing that even Jane was talking about as far as legislation efforts, there is a lack of legislation that goes through the House. A lot of them fall flat, unfortunately. And one of the biggest ones I noticed or through my research is housing. So through the Florida Tenant and Landlord Act, there are no protections for domestic abuse violence victims as far as getting protection for them against against eviction and temporary leasing and or lease breaking. You can, if you're going through public housing, you can receive some protection through the Victim of the Violence Against Women Act and the Fair Housing Act as far as protections, but is more gender-based. So you cannot discriminate against a population gender-wise if they do see a discrepancy of which a lot of female or women are being discriminated against as far as not being able to file for rents or receiving rent access. They will investigate that, and if it does seem that they're only targeting women, they may investigate it further, and that may be a way for domestic abuse violence victims to get resources. But unfortunately, we know that although women are disproportionately affected by domestic violence, they're not the only population, so that does leave a lot of victims falling through the crack because, again, that's not necessarily enacted in the Florida Tenant and Landlord Act. It's more other ways in which they're getting services. So there's a huge gap as far as people getting aid because if you need to break the lease early, that lump sum of money, you may not have it. If you maybe are not, you are no longer being victimized, but the complaint from the neighbor allows you to feel unsafe now and or there was damage to property, that person can still evict you on the purposes of that complaint, but not necessarily because you're a victim of domestic violence. So there's loopholes that people can go through to still evict you and put you out of your home, even though, again, they're not necessarily targeting you because you're a victim. So that's very scary for a lot of people. And then just quickly going over some of the other things, there are inclusive shelters, at least in the Tampa region, Hillsborough County region, in which I am located, as far as those who are men needing resources to LGBTQ, which is really great. And overall, there is access to the injunction process through floridacourts.gov. They have lots of resources that you can review yourself. Of course, if you do not have a legal eye, it is very hard language to read sometimes and follow along. But they do have a great flow chart in which allows you to figure out the way in which a judge may review an injunction process. So when it comes to injunction, it's either denied, temporary given, or you are set for a hearing. So when something is set for a temporary injunction, that abuser has to immediately vacate the home in which you guys share. You have 15 days from that temporary injunction to the hearing, to then file for a final hearing. So the judge can determine yes or no, this injunction is going to be filed. So it is a lengthy process. And again, that restraining order, although beneficial, sometimes that 15-day process can feel like a lot for those who really need services right then and there. They really need an injunction to be filed. They need to figure out the court, the child care services and things of that nature. So that can be very hard for those, especially when it comes to not having the legal protection from the landlord. And that 15 days, although that person is temporary taken out of the home, that's not a forever thing. And if that file for restraining order is denied, then that only makes it worse for the victim, of course. And then just going over just some domestic violence services in Florida, we do have over 40 plus domestic abuse shelters. And of course, we have even more domestic abuse partners and coalitions in the area. There is a big difference between funding from the state and more privatized funding, because the state is mandated per each benchmark and rules and regulations of what you can and cannot use the money for, whereas more private funding, you could more expand towards maybe smaller projects of maybe youth services or LGBTQ services and stuff like that. A lot of shelters, they will use a mix of both state and private funding. So a lot of them will tap into both so that they can expand their reach to others. There is also, in my research, I saw there's a big misconception about restraining orders. People think that people just hand them out like candy, in which that's not true at all. That it is a very hard process to go through for the victim and those impacted by domestic violence in the home as well. Again, the judge can deny. There is a whole flow chart in which the judge will determine whether the restraining order is upheld or not. So if the judge were to deny it, again, that also puts someone at risk as well. And so it's not just a process in which I don't like my neighbor, I don't like my boyfriend broke up with me. That means that I could file a restraining order and it's going to be upheld. Like the judge can say no to, and that puts a lot of people at risk as well. And also in my research, I just wanted to point out that there's a big difference between the attorney roles in domestic violence cases and the victim advocate's role. So victim advocate is a mandated reporter, while your attorney, just like any other lawyer situation, that relationship is a lot different than when it comes to those who are more of an advocate for you and a partner, as far as just like guiding through the case. And so some people get really scared when talking to victim advocates because they know that those people are mandated reporters. So if there's something going on in the home in which, yes, it's not, a lot of people, as we saw with the criminality of domestic abuse survivors, maybe it's not the best, isn't put you in the best light. Maybe you have children in the home, maybe there's violence to the child and you did not report that, they have to report it. And so people get kind of scared and they sometimes pass that on to the attorney, in which the attorney has to clarify, no, our relationship is a little bit different because we're not mandated reporters. We have a close connection between, upholding that legal, you as a legal aid and legal advisor. That's a little bit different. So in general, there's a lot to work on as far as getting services for those in the state of Florida, especially like I mentioned before, the housing. Florida is a landlord-friendly state, and so it is very hard when it comes to any housing policy to get passed, let alone for those as much needed as domestic abuse survivors. So I'm more than happy to continue on my research, and I'm happy that everyone was here so I could share it, and I'm super happy that everyone came out today.
Thank you very, very much, Jasmine, for your work with our committee and such amazing informative presentation and work. We will have questions for Jasmine and anyone else towards the end of the webinar. Our next presenter is Rita. She's going to update us on some of her work on the effects of childhood trauma. Rita, are you able to unmute?
Yeah, it kept muting and unmuting. I don't know. It was kind of crazy. I'm And now, okay. I want to draw your attention to an issue that is a plague in our society: child sexual abuse and trauma. The topic demands our immediate attention and merits concerted efforts to create a safer world for our children. Here are some of the facts. Prevalence. Child sexual abuse is more common than we may think. According to the World Health Organization, an estimated 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 13 boys worldwide experience sexual abuse before the age of 18. In the US, it's 1 in 9 girls and 1 in 53 boys. Every 9 minutes, Child Protection Services finds evidence for a claim of child sexual abuse. In 2019, 656,000 cases were reported and documented. This would pack 10 modern football stadiums. These numbers represent a significant portion of our population, reflecting the scale of this issue. Underreporting is a problem. Studies suggest that only 1 in 10 victims discloses the abuse they have experienced. The reasons for underreporting are many, ranging from fear and shame to the manipulation and control exerted by perpetrators. It's estimated that out of 1,000 assaults, only 310 are reported to the police. Long-term consequences are not limited to childhood, and lifetime issues impact the trauma survivors. They face physical, emotional, and psychological consequences. They can include post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, such as intrusive memories, nightmares, flashbacks, hypervigilance, and emotional distress, anxiety and depression. They may experience feelings of sadness, hopelessness, guilt, shame, low self-esteem, difficulties in interpersonal relationships, such as trusting others, intimacy issues, and maintaining healthy relationships. Sexual behaviors and problems, substance abuse and self-harm like cutting and burning, and an increased risk of suicide, as well as disassociation, border personality disorder, and eating disorders. These symptoms can persist for years or even decades after the abuse. The trauma can also affect their educational and professional achievements, leading to long-lasting socio-economic consequences and professional achievements. In a 2015 study, the estimated costs of lost worker productivity, healthcare costs, special education costs, and child welfare expenditures was over $830,000 per victim. Sorry, hold on, I skipped the button. Gender disparities. While both boys and girls can be victims of such abuse, it is important to note that girls are disproportionately affected. However, it is crucial not to overlook the experience of boys, as they face unique challenges in reporting and seeking support due to societal expectations and stigma surrounding male victimization. Online exploitation. With the advent of technology, child sexual abuse has taken on a new form, such as online exploitation. The proliferation of the internet has made it easier for perpetrators to access and exploit children. In recent years, reports of online child sexual abuse material have skyrocketed, highlighting the urgent need for improved safety measures. These statistics paint a distressing picture of the prevalence and consequences of child sexual abuse and trauma. It is imperative that we all take a proactive stance in addressing this issue by raising awareness, implementing effective prevention programs, supporting survivors, and holding perpetrators accountable. We can work together to create a society where every child is safe from harm. And on one final quick note, this is where one crisis intersects with another crisis. According to an article written by Andrew R. Arthur, dated April 20, 2023, this year, on the Center for Immigration Studies website, he wrote, "Did Joe Biden lose 85,000 migrant kids?" It was subtitled OOR, which is the Office of Refugee Resettlement. Director, he doesn't know, and most of the media don't seem to care. There's food for thought. Well, maybe they don't care, but we do, and so should you. And it was longer than 3 minutes, but I had to get it. I had to get that all in there. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Co-Chair Rita. And I am coming onto the screen. We very much appreciate your information. Some of the information that I was going to present has actually been kind of addressed by Professor Murray. Once again, I'm interested in kind of like looking at what would be like the negative, if you can imagine a film strip. What's missing from this? What is not covered? What is not really examined in this whole discussion? For me, I'm interested in the income loss of women who are incarcerated. I'm interested in the societal costs as perpetrators of abuse are allowed to go from person to person to person, or child to child to child, and inflict lasting damage that contribute that can cripple their ability to be able to contribute to society for life. So I had some statistics here that kind of parallel what Professor Murray was speaking about. The number of incarcerated women increased by more than 750% from 1980 through 2017, with women of color being disproportionately incarcerated. The other things are 2/3 of the women in prison are women of color. In 2004, Black women were 4.5 more times likely than white women to be incarcerated. Poverty is one of the most significant factors in women's involvement in the criminal justice system. 80% of women in 1994, these are old statistics from ACLU. Professor Jane has much more updated statistics, but in 1994, 80% of women in prison reported incomes of less than $2,000 in a year before their arrest, and 92% reported incomes of less than $10,000. The vast majority of women in prison have been victims of violence prior to their incarceration, including domestic violence, assault, and child abuse. 79% of women in federal and state prisons reported physical abuse, and over 60% reported past sexual abuse. Research shows that the overwhelming majority of women defendants in the criminal justice system have extensive histories of adult abuse that may result in homelessness, of childhood and adult abuse that may result in homelessness, substance abuse, and economic marginality that force them into survival by illegal means. Which is what Professor Murray was also reiterating. Some women are coerced to engage in crime by battering partners or partners' financial abuse. Some are arrested for defending themselves against abuse, and others are arrested for not protecting their children from domestic violence. Recent changes in welfare, housing, immigration policies, drug enforcement, mandatory arrest, prosecution, and sentencing policies further criminalize women's efforts to survive, escape, and cope with abuse. Low-income women of color are most at risk for abuse and most at risk for being criminalized, entrapped, and forced by abusive policies into the correction system. And this is the source was VolNet, and I will have the resources at the end of the slide. A project of the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence. So the Violence Against Women Net, and they have a lot of resources that you can go through there to find out more. I want to talk about some of the laws that we would be interested in co-aligning with sister organizations on. One for me that was extremely, I find to be, was extremely destructive in my own life. And I also wonder how many other people it impacts are laws that are like an example of one that are counterproductive. to protection of children. There was one, and I'll share this with you. There's one, and I'm not sure if it's still current, but Professor Jane Ann could probably speak to that at some point, which was called the Parents' Right of First Refusal. So what happens when it's a law that basically explains that if you are incarcerated or if you are somehow unable to care for your child, the abuser, the biological person, not the abuser, I'm sorry, the biological other parent has first access to the child. What happens in cases where we cannot prove that they've done this, or, and you know, it's proven in civil court, in family court, but not in a criminal justice system. I wonder how many children wind up in the hands of people that are destroying their futures. And then there's another one, which is Parental Alienation Act, which I have listed here, where they conceal a child from the parent, where the action manifests an intent substantially to deprive that parent of parental rights. So in other words, if you're protecting your child from someone who's abusing them, you can lose your child to that person, custody of your child, because you're considered to be alienating them from the child when you're not allowing them full access. So these are some of the things that I would personally be interested in working with other organizations towards eradicating. I feel that turning children over to abusers for whatever reason is not acceptable when we look at the impacts that it has on people's lives. So the next person that would have been presenting is one of our members, Shilpa. And Shilpa decided, or she actually sent a message a couple of hours ago that she's battling some health issues and she won't be able to present today. But her focus area is on domestic violence among non-English speakers. And she did a really great presentation. Please email us at nomoredpows@gmail.com if you'd like a copy of last year's presentation. It's also on the WILPF YouTube channel, but she's going to continue her work on the various levels that domestic violence among non-English speakers affects this particular community. April is a person who is on our committee as well. She has a special needs child that she cares for, and she's very involved in the community of other mothers who have special needs children. You might be familiar if you've read Peace and Freedom magazine. She put out an article on some of her experiences there. Unfortunately, she had technical issues and was unable to be able to present with us today. But we will ensure that her message gets relayed in another medium, or perhaps an update when we have our semi-annual meetings. Next up, we have George Friday, who is going to present her research on domestic violence and the African-American community. You're on mute. Thank you.
Thanks. Hello, everyone. Happy Domestic Violence Awareness Month. You're certainly getting a lot of great information during this webinar today to raise your awareness. Most of what I will share is about my experience. I'm not an expert. I'm not a PhD in any of these issues, but starting in college with other college students who were dealing with intimate partner violence, and all the way to my 40s doing work with domestic violence shelters in part of North Carolina, I've interacted with folks that have taught me a lot, and I will share a little bit of that today. Mostly what I've learned by working with organizations and institutions that are trying to address the disparity in services for BIPOC folks in the domestic violence or intimate partner field. In the early 2000s, the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence did this great study. I got to be part of the facilitating team, so I could hear all the brilliant people figuring things out. There are a couple of quotes from that I'm going to share with you that I think say a lot. This is the report that they sent out. One of them, by intentionally denying Black people access to economic opportunities, the ability to build intergenerational wealth, healthcare, education, and a sense of safety from governmental systems, racist policies increase the prevalence of risk factors for domestic violence. The analysis here missed one very fundamental truth that weaves through everything because it is ubiquitous. White supremacy and misogyny, every bit all over these things, and makes it more complicated. The other quote from National Coalition Against Domestic Violence: these systems create numerous barriers for survivors seeking safety. Law enforcement officials often arrest Black survivors, and police, jurors, and judges are less likely to believe Black survivors than white survivors. Racist systems put Black people at greater risk of experiencing intimate partner violence. So again, that ubiquitousness, is that a word? Or of white supremacy and misogyny, which is everywhere. And part of the question, or possibly the answer, is how is white supremacy and misogyny affecting different communities, different individuals? I'm going to put in the chat the link to an organization that sadly no longer exists, but is still a great resource around this work. It is and I'm going to share my screen. This is my last act here with y'all. Where are you? Here it is. No, it's not it. My apologies. Okay, first in the chat. Boom. Now, sharing the screen. Okay, yes. Very good. All right. Okay. All right. The link I put in the chat is for the Institute on Domestic Violence in the African American Community. They came into being in late 1990s, 96 or 97. And then in 2011, had a great national conference and fomented these goals that I'm sharing with y'all. I'm trusting that you can read them. I'll make them as big as I can. If someone can't read them, we can email it with follow-up materials from today. But if you go to that website, there's still great resources there. These are still worthwhile goals to pursue, to address issues in the African American community when it comes to domestic violence. And again, happy Domestic Violence Awareness Month as we all become more aware. Thanks. Back
Thank
to you.
very, very much, George, for your presentation. Next, we have Margot Schulter, whose area of focus is on domestic violence in the Lavender and the gay and lesbian community.
Thank you, Dee. The first thing to say is that one of the barriers we face, I think, in dealing with the situation adequately, there's a certain kind of utopian thought in the lesbian community itself, as well as outside of it, that women are sort of, especially lesbian women, are so progressive, and that we would never hurt each other. And it does happen. And so we sometimes speak of the second closet, because the first closet is being lesbian and not being out of a closet on that. And the second closet is being abused by another woman in a lesbian relationship. And unfortunately, it does happen. And statistically, it appears the risk of being abused in a lesbian relationship is at least comparable to that in a heterosexual relationship, and possibly greater. One survey found that 61.1% of bisexual women, 43.8% of lesbian women, and 35% of heterosexual women, as they self-identified, reported abuse in relationships. And there are 4 types of abuse. There's the physical, there's emotional and psychological abuse, there's sexual abuse, And there's also financial abuse that often will accompany one of the other forms, at least. And one of the vulnerabilities, which it's not unique to lesbian relationships, but perhaps it takes place in special forms because of the fear of being outed and of coming out as lesbian in the process of discussing your abusive relationship, is that the fact that a lesbian woman in seeking support might need to, come out as lesbian to the people she's seeking support with. And I know one survey found only one third of lesbian survivors of abuse relied on family members. I don't know what the statistic would be in heterosexual relationships, and I'm not rushing to the conclusion that it would be higher than that. But I think it does appear that the fear of being outed is one factor, and perhaps it's a lesser factor currently, given the movement of marriage equality, but I think it's probably still a significant factor. And among law enforcement personnel, regrettably, there are still misconceptions, which are also shared by the general public. And one of them is that women are incapable of very serious violence, which unfortunately you could wish it were true, but it's not true. And the other misconception, interestingly found among police in Massachusetts, is that it's a curious that lesbian women generally will be very skilled in self-defense, because they heard there were a lot of self-defense courses offered in the women's and the feminist communities, so that lesbians would be experts in self-defense. So that any woman who faces domestic violence or physical abuse is going to be prepared to defend herself, which unfortunately is not necessarily true, but these are curious stereotypes. And one statistic which is just sort of interesting, it was found that when police officers answered domestic abuse calls, it was much more likely they would arrest someone if it was a lesbian situation than if it were a gay male situation. I don't know what that concludes, but that was the situation reported. And I should just conclude briefly with some hopeful developments in California. And again, this is on paper, and how these laws will actually be implemented and enforced is a different question. But Section 3100 of the Family Code in California this is the 10th, 2023 marks the 10th anniversary of the restoration of marriage equality in California. And for the first bit of good news is they require that lesbian relationships and generally same-sex marriage situations will be treated the same as if it were heterosexual marriage. So the law is in principle non-discriminatory. The second bit of good news, which Dee was referring to, that child custody decisions must be made according to the best interest of the child, without any rules of the right of first refusal to a possible abuser. And the third bit of good news is that any domestic abuse in the situation towards either another partner or a child must be considered in making child custody decisions. So that's the situation. Thank you very much for the opportunity of presenting. It's a pleasure to be part of this very diverse and very informative program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margot. We do have a clip that April sent via email of of a presentation that she wanted to have. I'm not certain if everyone is able to hear it at this point. We can play that briefly, and then we had originally planned to go into breakout rooms. However, looking at time limitations and constraints, with a smaller crowd, I think that it's best that we go to questions and answers. So I will go ahead and play April's clip really quickly. Her focus is on the mental health of abusers. And so hopefully we can all hear this.
Hello, my name is April Rummery, and I am a member of DPoW, Domestic Prisoners of War. Today I'm talking to you about mental health and domestic violence. According to Break the Silence Against Domestic Violence.org, in the 2023 article, they say the link between mental health and domestic violence includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and act.
She's got
There are
3
5
minutes.
crucial signs you should never ignore. Hypersensitivity to criticism. Most are incapable of self-reflection of their own inappropriate behaviors. They won't engage in self-betterment because they truly believe there is nothing to be changed about themselves. It can become a cycle.
We are not hearing anything.
Charm. They say and do whatever is needed to fulfill self-agenda. They will try to appear as the perfect mate until they get what they want. They also result in blackmail to get away with what they want. Inflation of self-importance is self-entitlement. The laws do not apply to me. They believe people are so envious of their success. They have deep-seated insecurities, so they will make up stories seeking praise or empathy. And fifth, we have gaslighting, which is a hallmark trait. They will try to make others second guess themselves, playing where it does not belong, and brainwashing. This includes false accusations. They can make you also question your reality and sanity. The source for women's advocates, on average, more than half of women seen in mental health settings are being or have been abused by an intimate partner. There are specific diagnoses that are commonly experienced by these women, which includes post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and anxiety. Traumatic events produce profound and lasting changes in psychological, physiological, arousal, emotional, cognition, memory, changes that wouldn't necessarily result in a psychological diagnosis. It's important to understand that not everyone is impacted in the same way, and someone's mental health can be impacted without post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and anxiety. Other ways an individual may be impacted is difficulties with being productive at work and school, with caregiving, difficulties establishing and engaging in healthy relationships, and adapting and coping with adversity. Relationships with an abuser can involve a toxic cycle of emotional destruction. The victim may not be entirely aware of the toll that the mental health and self-esteem until it's too late. Lifelong damages and trauma, and in some cases, the abuser even takes their life. Mental health plays a significant role in family dynamics. The impact harms the entire family. My friend's cousin, Mary Ann Carlton Burns, was murdered by her ex-husband, Kenneth Brian Burns. He took her life in front of her child and left the child draining the mother's blood. Kenneth returned back to the horrific scene that Mother's Day and was taken into custody. He was able to control her and make her believe that he'd been a loving husband time and time again. She finally saw through his deceit and left him. Family and friends said he struggled with mental health and pushed for him to be institutionalized at the murder trial. He had a long, ongoing history of domestic violence. The final word of the lawyer was he would apologize, make unkept promises. After a while, he stopped apologizing and started blaming. He made me question my own sanity. He was so charming and romantic for such a long time, then suddenly lost all empathy and failed to reflect. I was so convinced I could do better, be better, and he loved me more. Then I realized I had to leave. He will never change or think he is the problem. I was always the problem. After she left, he did take her life, and she was not able to ever be able to be a part of her son's trauma and help him recover from all the abuse that he had experienced, or see her son grow up.
So that is April's focus area on the mental health of abusers. Once again, if anyone would like to join our committee and work in any particular area, please email us at no more DPoWs at WILF. I had at Gmail. It's actually at WILPFUS.com. So I apologize about that little typo. And I'm going to share the screen here. We just want to close with our disclaimer that although most of the committee are survivors, not everyone is a survivor that's on a committee. And we are not a domestic crisis line. We cannot assist with current domestic emergencies in any way, even with advice. However, if you have experience with this issue and would like to join our collaborative team environment, we welcome your experiences and we are happy to work together. And then here's some information on where to donate to WILF. DPoW has its own link, bit.ly/DPoW USA. And St. Paul, Ramsey, and Ramsey County Intervention Advocacy Project. The information was shared from Rebecca prior to where their website is. And if you'd like to contribute to their work as well, all help in as many areas as possible is required. As you can see, this is a very serious crisis in our society that is highly underestimated and not acknowledged, but it's a poison that if continually, hidden and brushed away and not talked about, will continue to impact the future of our society and people that could otherwise be contributing to a strong and thriving community here in the US. And with that, I will open up the floor. I have some Q&A. You can see that on the recording when we share it. Some of the resources and references that you'll be able to see when we share. You can pause the video or send us an email at nomordepals@wilpfus.org in order to be able to find some of our resources and our links. And with that, we want to thank everyone for all of your work. Hi, Rita.
Hi, sorry. Before going into the question and answer period, I did want to add something that I mistakenly left off my presentation. That study that I referred to that came out in that article that Andrew Arthur wrote, it was a study done over the previous 2 years. So it was the figure of 85,000 is over a 2-year period. And I didn't bring a clear reference to why that's so damning and distressing, because these are kids that got into the immigration system and they totally just disappeared. There was no way to track them. A lot of these kids get put into, they're not foster homes, but they're being fostered, and they lost track. There's maybe a handful that like 5 that ran away from their locations, and others, they just don't know where they're at. And because of the situation, some of them, I couldn't give you an exact figure, are involved in being trafficked. That's why that kind of situation, be it war, famine, any kind of environmental issue, disaster, puts all the children at risk to get in situations where they're being trafficked. So I just wanted to clarify that.
That's really a chilling thought. Thank you for remembering people who otherwise would not be acknowledged or remembered. And with that, we are opening up to questions and answers. We lost Jane Ann Murray. She put in the chat that she had to catch a flight. So we're grateful to have caught as much of her time as possible. She did put prior to having to take off for her flight, she did put her email address in the chat for anyone that has direct questions for her, or you can send them to us and we'll make sure that you get an answer. So you can send them to us via email at nomordepals@wilpfus.org. And so are there any questions? I see a raised hand from Virginia Pratt. Hi. Oh, you're on mute. Let me see if I can ask to unmute you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dee, and to all the presenters for all this hard work and the variety, the scope that you covered in this. I'll just say that I, in Boston, oversee an elder mental health outreach program for older adults. And I see so many people who are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, and they're still very much impacted by either childhood trauma or sexual assault or domestic violence, even decades ago. The lingering impacts in terms of depression, anxiety, PTSD, low self-esteem. It's very dramatic. So I really applaud everyone that's working with you on this work. I think it's critical work. Thank you.
Thank you. And we do have a member who's been very ill. She struggles with physical disabilities, but we have an area where members can come and work on those abuse of the elderly and abuse of disabled people. So it's another area we'll continue to flesh out and recruit members to over the next year or two. And hi, Darian.
Yes, after hearing from both Jane Ann Murray and Michelle French, it occurs to me I have a question that perhaps Michelle would want to respond to. Given, Michelle, what you said about your choice to terminate two of your pregnancies, what might you say about how survivors of domestic abuse might be affected or even incarcerated due to the severe restrictions in some states now on legal abortions? Thank you.
Important question. The first, and Dee will tell you that I sometimes come off a little blunt. There's always adoption in that case of incarceration. And the abortion ban is only on late term abortion, from what I've been kind of informed as far as my state is concerned, and my state's Tennessee. So late term abortion, I'm against regardless. As somebody that I've done abortion and I've also done adoption. I've given up my first son. I gave him up for adoption, and we were reunited a few years ago. But I don't know. Like I can't judge somebody's circumstance or something like that. I just know what I would do in that situation. If I was incarcerated and I was pregnant, I would seek out either a friend or somebody, and it was a late term situation, to adopt that child. And of course, the reason I gave up mine for adoption at that point was, and I actually went what I thought was to an abortion clinic, and it was a right to life clinic. And that's when I walked out, I knew I was supposed to give them up, and not abort at that point. But my kind of consensus is, if it was me, and that's all I can speak to, I can't speak on behalf of anybody else, but if it was me and I was incarcerated, it was late term, or even I was going to be incarcerated, or and I think that's what you're referring to, and correct me if I'm wrong, then I would seek for adoption, and I would not do a late term. And that's just my own thing. And again, I can't refer to anyone, else, but for me, I would not do a late term, because the baby has already developed. They've already proven through science that the baby does have feelings, and it does have emotions at that point. And do it, that, again, that's me, and I cannot portray any judgment on anyone else. That's only mine. my thoughts on it. And was that what you're referring to, or is it?
I was actually wondering about women who did seek abortions being incarcerated in a number of states now. I believe the ban on abortion starts at 16 weeks or 12 weeks, which when it's 12 weeks, many women aren't even aware that they're pregnant. And so once they become aware, it may be too late to get a legal abortion. So they might end up in jail.
And again, I apologize for being blunt. Some things fall on us, on our responsibility, and if I haven't had my cycle for several periods, then obviously something's going on. So, and that's just me. I cannot, and I will not agree with late-term abortion. I'm sorry. Again, that's my personal thing. Because I have done both. But the late term, I just, and now having children and seeing that, I'm sorry, I can't. You know what I mean? Like, I can't go there, and I can't stand behind something like that. But again, if it's somebody else, then that's and that's their choice. That's their choice. But I can't. You know what I mean? Like, and I'll be honest with you, I'm not gonna ever not be truthful about a stance, or backtrack on a stance.
Okay, so I just want to ask a little bit of a clarifying question of what Darian was asking. She's talking about now women are being imprisoned and incarcerated for having abortions, if I'm not mistaken. And one of the things that she mentioned is some women, as early as 12 weeks, which is, 3 months, 3 or 4 months. That's not a late-term abortion. And so she was asking for your input on incarcerating women for having abortions.
Oh, well, then I misunderstood. I thought she was saying if they were incarcerated and they wanted to get a late-term abortion, that they're not allowing them at that particular point. That's what so I completely misunderstood, and I deeply apologize for that. I mean, if the doctor performed the abortion, how come it's not falling on the doctor? I mean, why is the woman getting prosecuted? And that's another thing I have a real issue is the abused are always the ones that are being prosecuted, and the fingers are pointed at, we're crazy, we're this, we're that, whatever. But in this kind of scenario, I don't agree with that. I mean, I think there needs to be accountability on all levels. If there's an abortion clinic that performed that abortion, then how come it's fallen on the woman solely as the quote, you know what I mean, murderer, when the doctors, who's actually the one that performed the procedure, and the nurses and things like that. So I think there needs to be a realm of accountability all the way around. I don't agree with a woman being prosecuted for that. If it's available and they choose to, it's not something I agree upon. I have no right to it, but I don't agree upon them being prosecuted for quote murder, when they actually didn't do it. They went in, they signed the papers, but they physically didn't do it. So if you're looking at kind of a premeditated, scenario, the doctor is the one that performed the procedure.
Right. And some of us don't agree. I mean, it's a medical procedure. Some of us don't agree at all that anyone should be prosecuted for a woman making the best decision with her body that she has, available to her, being allowed that option. I don't know. I know that you explained, about what led to your decisions, but do you feel, you had the right to make that decision? And we can go round and round. That's a whole other topic area, right?
We can go round and round, and I think it falls on, if you believe in science, and I would say a large portion of us believe in science, that at the point where this particular embryo has feelings, and can feel, then I think all bets are off. I mean, that's just me. Then that it feels this pain. And I think, that needs to be accounted for. And that's just my own scenario. But again, I think the doctors need to be like, we can go round and round with that, but we're also going back to judges. And it seems like there's this level of high level accountability on professionals and executives that are never prosecuted for their crimes. And the crimes are, the doctor did the procedure, or in my case, and I meant to touch on this and I didn't, I'm passionate about the fact that judges are allowed to get away with murder with zero accountability, and they don't follow the law. They biasly prosecute, the protective parent or any kind of, person that's the victim, and there's no accountability. And there needs to be some oversight on judges, because they have the ultimate authority over everything that we're discussing today. A judge has the ability to move one way or the other to protect this individual and these children and things like that, or to sacrifice them. And that's what they're doing. They're basically throwing them to the wolves. So I mean, as a group, I would love to see, a movement to make judges accountable. And there's some oversight to where if they egregiously have overlooked and have not abided by the law, then they need to be disbarred. Period. Why not go? I mean, like, I just don't understand. I don't understand no accountability. They're the only people that have zero accountability and allow predators, and again, family court, we can go to family court. In what scenario, if you think about it, you go to family court, you bring up the allegations of sexual and or physical abuse, and a judge remains and allows that perpetrator to continue visitation with that child. But if that perpetrator did the same exact thing to the neighbor's child, which is just the next house over, suddenly game on and now we're going to prosecute? How is that realistic? How is that a normal scenario with common sense? But if it's in the same household, suddenly, it's still their child.
Yeah. Or a biological parent gets access. The molester gets visitation rights to the children.
Yes.
One case I know of, on a personal level, they get to visit the child every 2 weeks, and the child has to call their molester every other week. Yep. So if they weren't connected by blood, would that be something that the court system would feel is proper?
And if you look at it in the context that I just brought up, that, if that child was the neighbor's child, are you going to allow him to, or her, it can be a her, because I've asked my mother, and that was another kind of statistic on our own internal level on who typically goes on the run with their children. And, the minorities, I wanted to know about minorities. I wanted to know kind of how come I haven't been seeing any? And she broke it down, and it was disheartening. Like, it was brutal. But when you break it down, at what point is a rapist allowed to call their victim? That's called intimidation of a witness. But with, pedophiles or, physical abusers, they're allowed, visitation, they're allowed all of this, and yes. They intimidate these children, and then suddenly the children won't testify. Well, I don't know why, because they have no freaking protection. It doesn't take a brain surgeon to figure out that suddenly they go dark and they stop talking is because the perpetrator has intensely, overwhelmed this child.
Yes, and in some cases, the parent they trust is saying it's okay for them to go see this person. So, whatever happened must not be
They're
all
not,
that bad.
yeah, they're not
We're
protected.
forced to do it under duress by the courts.
Yep.
Rita, I see your hand.
Yes, I I wanted to add
Hi,
on.
Rita.
Hi, Michelle. Actually, I was going to piggyback off of you. Something in our previous discussion, first time we met, and it kind of goes along also with and well, it's a statement that she had brought up earlier, and she's gone now, but I'm still going to reference it. I had asked you a question, or made a connection, anyways, about the fact that pedophilia is still very prevalent and just seems to be increasing. And the fact that the very people that are supposed to be protecting the children are themselves perpetrators. And that's why you don't get heavy sentencing for pedophiles, because it's pedophiles helping pedophiles.
Oh,
It's like a
100%.
network.
And I think it's important to, and maybe there should be some kind of database on what states and counties are the most egregious, in this behavior of protecting a pedophile. LA County Court, the same court system as Britney Spears, if you initially go in for custody of a child, they will not release that case until that child ages out at the age of 18. You could move across the country or to freaking Canada, and they will keep your case and will not let it go. How is that legal? Collin County, which is in Dallas, Texas, is the next worst county to have a custody of sexual abuse in. So there is a handful of counties and things like that across the country that are known. Back in the day when my mom would get a call, she told them, don't worry about a binder, don't worry about, what I mean, your evidence or anything else. You get in a car and you leave immediately, because you're not going to get justice, and they're going to come after you and they're going to jail you, period. And it's true. It's true. But I think, like you, I don't think, with the amount of children that are missing right now at the border, and what I've seen, like on the bottom half, I have a lot of reservations about doing any kind of real change until we get a new administration. I have a lot of fear about that, because, there's been, it's really scary for a child right now. It's very, very scary. And the fact of how they're coming after women. And I can give you a case real quick of how brutal they are towards a protective parent. And especially if you're a woman, that there's a lady, she had we're talking stacks and stacks and stacks. She had protective orders. She had everything. And they were still given visitation. Her children begged her to leave. So she did. She left. She went to Israel. Her children, her ex-husband died. Okay. But she still stayed over there. Last year, her children are now in their early 20s. Her and her daughter went to Greece, and something happened. And next thing you know, she was arrested in Greece, and California extradited her all the way back to California, LA, to where they tried to prosecute her for kidnapping. Yes, husband's dead, stack of evidence. We're talking medical evidence, protection orders, the whole 9 yards. They're trying to prosecute her. How is that realistic? These kids are in their early 20s and they're still trying to prosecute a mother who went and died on the sword for her children to protect them. Now, ultimately, we were getting ready to rain the storm down on them, and they backed off and let it go. Obviously so. You know what I mean? Like, your key witness is dead, which he should be. And so, yeah, I mean, They know some. I have no sympathy for the abusers at all. I will run you over and back over top of you, and I will not even think twice about it. I'll pray for you at the same time, but but there has to be a change. There has to be, and I think if judges, again, it falls to the top. If judges know that there's some kind of accountability, and now something that they stand to lose, they have to stand to lose something to make the right decision and to be accountable. And if they never lose anything, and if there's no accountability, how can we expect them to truly do the right thing?
It's a horrendous situation because there's been so many cases where the judges were pedophiles.
Yep.
The lawyers were pedophiles. The police, social services, the very
Don't
people.
get me started on DCS. Don't even get me started on that.
Yeah.
They're the worst. They're the worst child trafficker, like in existence right now, is Department of Children's Services. Like more children don't. I mean, it's disgusting. And again, no accountability. They get away with. There's nothing that ever happens. Nothing. So there needs to be a body, a regulatory body that instills these kind of, services and oversight. There has to be oversight. How come there's no oversight? There's oversight for everything else, but not for our next generation, not for the people that are going to take over and care for us when we get older. We better care for them now.
Yeah, well, they're protecting their supply. Excuse me.
Oh, well, thank you very much, everyone. Are there any further questions? And we'll keep working. We'll keep hammering on this, Michelle. This is not over with this webinar. We got a lot of work to do. All of us that are working as a team in many levels. So,
and I'm here 100%. Like if you, I have no qualm about, and I'm an open book. I don't mind sharing my experiences. It doesn't, I guess I don't have triggers anymore. Well, there was one trigger, and most people think I don't have feelings anymore, but I do. I was caught off guard when they did the documentary and they pulled in that audio recording of my grandfather and me when I was like 5 or 6 years old. And again, here's an audio recording. You can hear me wanting help on the phone, and he hangs up the phone. Hang up the phone. I had choice words for the director for that because I didn't know that was in there. I didn't even know it existed. I hadn't heard it, never heard it. And I was really upset about it. But again, we can have all the evidence in the world, but if these judges aren't accountable, nothing will change.
So Children of the Underground is a documentary series about Michelle and her family and the work that women were trying to do to protect their children in the 80s. It's highly informative about what some of us face when we go up against the justice system and try to protect our children. Sadly, I went through pretty much, I just was bawling through a good part of it because I went through a lot of the same things that are highlighted with fighting the court system to protect my child. And that was in 2005. So this information has been out here all these years, and yet it's just no one's doing anything with it. And so we have to continue our work in DPoW. We're going to work with our branches. We're going to work with our sister organizations, and we're going to do what we can, wherever we can, to make as many changes as we can, so long as we're here. Are there any other questions that anyone might have for Michelle or for Rebecca before we close, or any member of DPoW? Okay, having said that, we want to thank everyone for coming tonight. If you have any more questions for us, please contact us. No more DPoWs at WILPFUS.org. And again, thank you for your time and coming to support our work in this issue.